I kept dreaming of a world I thought I'd never see. And then, one day...
I think you want to see this.
So, we found it.
Welcome to the FDH Lounge Highlight Reel. From the team that brought you the FDH Lounge and the Fantasy Draft Help Insider, deliver to you the next evolution in new media excellence.
Doesn't it make sense that we would stay here and have possibly the time of your life?
The FDH Lounge Highlight Reel.
What would you say you do here?
The great American radio show on internet TV, where nothing is off topic.
Pay attention.
The following excerpts are organized by theme, subject matter, or gravitas.
Was that really necessary?
There's never a shortage of variety, entertainment, or pertinent content.
You'll know it's just a show, right?
Best show in the world.
This compilation is reflective of over 150 episodes of unique and entertaining programming.
All right, what do you say?
We're online and ready.
And now, for your consideration, the highlight reel.
Wow, I know, right?
Episode 131, Bob Barker. For a lot of the people that just kind of speak kind of vaguely about things that were done to the dogs or whatever, I mean, the actual record, and you picked up on me using the word horrific, the actual record of what happened with the dogs, the electrocutions, the beatings, everything that went along with that, it's one of these things where I don't think he would have the degree of popularity that he's been able to regain if these things were known to more people.
Well, I think that... in a way, the only thing positive that came out of this whole reprehensible situation is that dogfighting was all over the newspapers and on television for a while. And dogfighting, there's probably some dogfighting in every state in the Union. Some states have more of it than others. But dogfighting is rampant, and it is illegal in many states, of course. And he brought this to the public's attention. And I understand that enforcement agencies received more tips on dogfighting after the Michael Dick tragedy than they had ever had before, and also made more arrests, and there have been more fines and more imprisonments than ever before. So it worked in a positive way in that regard. But what he did, and what all dog fighters do to these dogs, is just terrible. And the poor, many of them, they can't even place them in homes because they're absolutely destroyed mentally. And people who enjoy dogfighting, I just cannot understand. I cannot understand them, nor do I want to, or be associated with them in any way.
Episode 127, New York Post college football and basketball columnist Len Robbins. They had been threatening last year to make it 96 teams in there, and I have the very cynical point of view, Len, that they floated that out there. It got massive outrage, and I had the sense it was a deliberate trial balloon so that when you go from 65 to 68, everybody says, oh, thank God, it's not a massive change here. Did you have any similar cynical thoughts about that when the ultimate parameters came down?
Oh, wow, you're a grassy knoll guy, huh? You're a conspiracy guy, huh? I like that. I didn't look at it quite like that. I was surprised because I think that there was a tremendous amount of money to be gained if they had gone to, an even bigger format. Now, having said that, nobody ever explained to me why they felt the need to even fix something that, forget, wasn't broken. It was brilliant. I mean, to me, it's the best sporting event of the year. So, if they were thinking, well, it's like negotiations, right? I want 7 years at, $10 million, and what's the real number? I wouldn't put it past anyone. These are great business people, but to me, at the end of the day, the only argument that I heard that got me to sway a little into expanding the field, Jimmy Boeheim was just saying, look, we talk about it being a game for the kids. Why not have more kids involved in the tournament? And I didn't have an answer for that.
Episode 133, Super Bowl preview with Queens Chronicle columnist Lloyd Carroll. I understand Pittsburgh, and I always say Milwaukee/Green Bay, because realistically, okay, that's an adjunct of the Milwaukee market here.
Absolutely.
Taken together, still pretty small. So I get your point. But these are national brands. When you're talking about the Packers, and believe me, I'm a Browns fan, as much as it pains me to say that about the Steelers, undeniably they are a major national brand. Mm-hmm. They've both won Super Bowls in the last 15 years, so that you've got that going for them. There's a specialness to it there that's going to grip the casual fan. I understand what you're saying about...
That's what you just kind of hit the point. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not questioning the whole NFL heritage. God bless the late Vince Lombardi. I get that. Rah-rah, sis, boom, bah. I'm talking about the marginal fans, big markets sell. I mean, if you're a Fox, if you put yourself in David Hill's position and you're 60 minutes away from having New York and Chicago, the league's two biggest markets, meeting in the big game with all that advertising, with all the hype and hoopla. These networks, they're going to get big ratings no matter what for a Super Bowl. We know that. But it becomes a game of, will it be the most watched ever? I mean, that has a certain cachet that every network wants. Don't forget, Fox also wants to springboard their spring programming from this. There's a lot riding here that the marginals make a big difference. And I think that the media's kind of looked the other way. They buried this, but I had to bring it up. And, of course, everyone's going to deny it, and they'll all sing Kumbaya, hold hands for the Pittsburgh and Green Bay. But that's a reality that everybody's just hiding from.
Episode 143, Those Damn Hipsters with Kyle Ross.
You got to check out Yuck. You want to talk about the album of the year? Yuck. By Yuck.
Yuck.
Yes.
There's the official recommendation, the hipster album of the year.
We're 25% of the way into the year, and I don't know if you're going to have a better album than Yuck.
By Yuck.
By Yuck.
I'm going to look that up. If you're out there listening, Yuck by Yuck.
Here's a hipster
Someone post that on my
Let's
Facebook
keep it
wall.
Going.
Yeah.
If you love Dinosaur Jr., then you'll love Yuck.
I know you love Dinosaur Jr.
I do love Dinosaur Jr. Yes.
Although
I hate dinosaurs.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Great show.
Dinosaurs are stupid animals. Here's
dinosaurs.
I love dinosaurs.
Not the mama. Great show.
Oh, I'm not talking about the show. I'm talking about the species.
I love the show.
They were stupid. They got extinct.
I love the show and the species.
That were too stupid to realize that when it's warm, you walk somewhere where it's cold, and vice versa. I
have
no interest in
big lizards. That's why they all turned into birds.
I'm all about the show and the species. Yeah, I love them both. But I do. The show, the species, anything dinosaurs is good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You also have Jim Londos, right? This is your 15th greatest pro wrestler of all time.
And you're wearing 3D My Bloody Valentine glasses.
I don't know if that's hipster or if that's curmudgeon or what that is.
What? That it's too low
What's
to
curmudgeon?
That's like your bitter old man. That's the guy who, like some of these old guys that, like, this Triple H, he doesn't even deserve to be in the top 50 or something.
Oh, that's like
get off my
day.
Yeah, back in
my day, wrestlers were wrestlers.
Episode 149, comedian Pat Cooper. That's got to be one of the most important lessons that you can impart in a book like this, is not to let anybody take away your dignity and your self-respect. And you indicated, I understand that happened on a couple of different occasions with a couple of different folks that you were opening up for. What happened with Sinatra, I understand, did happen some other times here of somebody trying to mold you or shape you.
I worked with Paul Anka, 28 days, 56 shows. He never said hello to me. He never said that I was in the show. He never mentioned me. He passed me by, never said good evening. So on the 56th show, his last show, he was doing his last song. I walked on the stage, and I says, Paul, I don't want to upset your day, your evening. My name is Pat Cooper. I just finished 56 shows, and I'm alive, and I'm in front of you. And you got some damn nerve not to recognize me, at least as a human being. He didn't know what to say. He stood at me. He didn't know. He said, "You're not going to work with me no more." I said, "Fine." 6 months later, I worked with him in Boston. And then over there, he tried to conquer me and try to make me do things I refused to do. I said, "You're not paying me, number one. And number two, I'm not going to mop up after you. You're out of your mind. Are you nuts? Well, who are you? Are you God? I mean, do I have to do it? And people say, well, you burn bridges. I says, yes, but I paid the toll.
Episode 152, pro wrestler, Road Warrior Animal Joe Laurinaitis. Obviously, you talk about that in the book. It's the first thing that you mentioned towards the beginning of the book, talking about that night and everything that led up to it. Was there a sense in your minds in addition to we've gone up to New York, we've won the belts in the biggest place, was there also a sense of, in your mind, we've just done something nobody else is ever going to duplicate because the business is different now?
Well, Paul Ellering told that to us as we were going out to the ring. He goes, you guys realize no other tag team has won all 3 major championships. And we just go, really? I said, we never really thought about it. And, once we did, it was actually a thrill. And even though the business is a work, it was a thrill to win those titles, to be trusted by the biggest promotion in the business at that time, and still is, that we can carry the load as a tag team that represents the company. And that was the main thing. We just wanted that kind of respect from the boss.
Episode 138, longtime Major League pitching coach Rick Peterson. I'd always kind of had the thought, whenever people whine about why do these pitchers have pitch counts, I'd always said, look, that's something where you'd have to have a complete retraining on youth pitching because this is the way they've come up through the system. Arms have been protected. And I'd kind of thought that maybe if it started at the youth level, that there might be a way to have pitchers maybe go back to 4-game rotations at the Major League level, or possibly do it a little bit more like how it used to be done. But I'm rethinking that after reading some of your tweets here, that they've established that too many innings are dangerous, and that even if they wanted to try to change the parameters at the youth level, it seems like it wouldn't be a very good idea.
Well, one of the data that comes out of Dr. Andrews' research and Dr. Fleisig's research once again is that amateur pitchers that pitch over 100 innings, and that would be a chunk over 100, the research of those guys, or the impact of those guys actually being injured, those pitchers being injured, is incredibly high, incredibly high. One of the biggest factors at the amateur level with the risk of injury, more than anything else, is the fact that kids now are pitching all year round. They need to take time off. You need to take 2, 3, 4 months off in the off season, and that's what that's what's lacking in today's game. And and again, going back in the day, I don't know how far you can go back, but we're constantly sending out some great stuff, and you can always contact us through Facebook or Twitter on Rick Peterson 3P. We're really trying to do the best we can through Dr. Andrews' research and teaming up with Dr. Andrews and Tommy Glavine and Al Leiter and Jim Duquette, to mention some of the guys on our team, to really make an impact to drive these injuries down, and that's really what it's all about, allowing healthy pitchers to stay healthy and really enjoy the game at a high level.
Episode 139, pro wrestling and MMA journalist Dave Meltzer. Is there the sense, again, for a country that prizes order as much as they do, that going back to these shows might be seen culturally as a way of sort of pressing on through everything that has happened here, and that it might be regarded as kind of a healing balm to go out and kind of live life as one normally would have, at least for one night?
I think so. I think there's something to that, yeah. You got to remember, wrestling was a big part of the healing of the country after World War II. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where the cultural strength of professional wrestling there is, built around, the Japanese society and Ricky Dozan beating the big Americans. And it really, it was very unique how that industry developed there. It's very different from everywhere else. And, and the industry in Japan at its peak, where we're talking about in the 50s and even into the 90s, was, for the most part, much bigger than it ever was in this country, with possibly the exception of that 1998 to 2000, 1997 to 2001 period where wrestling really was big. But, when I was over there, it was just, when you're just around it, it was so much bigger than in the United States. I would tell people, like, they go, oh, yeah, like Antonio Inoki's like Hulk Hogan. I go, no, he's like Muhammad Ali. It's a different level than Hulk Hogan. But, people just kind of see, like, Hulk Hogan being the ultimate, or, oh, it's like WWE, and it's like, no. It's like in real society, like, you walk down the street and you see billboards with wrestlers on them, everywhere you go. I mean, not now. I'm talking about in its glory days.
Episode 141, longtime Survivor frontman Jimmy Jamison. If you're sitting there thinking, I'd like to create something in this sound, I'd like to tap into what people think of when they think of that time period, what are some of the things you do to try to make it happen? Because you had the vision, and very clearly it worked, because that's what I was hearing, and I think other people were hearing when they listened to the CD. How do you get from point A to point B and really summon up that 80s sound?
It really...
it wasn't really that sound was our sound, and so it really came natural. It's a big snare drum, loud big snare, so you can hear the drums and a vocal out front and some heavy guitars, and it pretty much we didn't really have to think about it at all. We just did what we do, and I think if we had to do some other kind of era's music, we'd have to rethink that even more so than the '80s stuff, because the '80s stuff it just came right out of us, that's an automatic. And if we had to do a '60s sound, it'd be a little bit different, it'd be more psychedelic or whatever you call it, but whatever the '60s sound was in the '70s and the '90s and for present day, that's when it would be hard to get from point A to point B. But on the '80s sound, we just did what we do, and it just happened.
Episode 138, legendary boxing journalists Burt Randolph Sugar and Teddy Atlas.
The drop-off of boxing overall can be attached to the drop-off in the interest and the significance of the heavyweight champions.
No, that's very well said. Personally, I don't think that's a very healthy development. I'm kind of an elitist when I look at this. I like my champions, all things being equal, to be kind of epic. So it's disappointing to me when it's not the case. Burt, let me ask you your thoughts on that as well. And I'll mention that when we had Teddy on in the fall, we talked about briefly with him the fact that the last real transcendent heavyweight title fight I think that we had was probably Lewis and Tyson back in June of '02. This has got to be, if not the longest drought in the modern history of sports, one of the longest ones. I mean, there can't be but one or two droughts longer than this of not having an epic heavyweight title fight like this. Again, Burt, we've come a long way from the fight of the century, and not in a good direction, it seems.
Well, what happens, Rick, is, first of all, Americans love big things. We love big bank accounts. We love big cars. We love big-chested women. We love big fighters. And when they're not American, it loses something to us. It's happened before. Sometimes when the heavyweight champion is not exciting or is not fighting fighters who are not even household names in their own households, like Larry Holmes, an underappreciated champion, but he's fighting Osvaldo Ocasio and Leroy Jones. We look to the middle area weight classes and we find satisfaction in a Leonard and a Hearns fight, or a Hagler and a Hearns fight. But we don't even have that anymore because Mayweather and Pacquiao seems never to be made. But the heavyweight division has been ours. And I remember Ring Magazine in the old days, they had a Ring record book. And it used to have a little box that said, heavyweight champions who weren't American. And to go Tommy Burns, Canada, Primo Canera, Italy, etc., Ingemar Johansson, Sweden. Well, now you can put a box in, that says heavyweight champions that are American. And we've lost interest in the heavyweight or big men events. And maybe that's why when two undefeated, as they were, Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, climbed in the ring as the first men to break the $1 million pay barrier, both getting $2.5 million that night in 1971. It was a singular event, and Teddy used the word correctly, that really transfixed our attention. Hardcore boxing fans and peripheral boxing fans, casual ones alike, because it meant so much to so many different people on so many different levels. And it was not only a sellout at Madison Square Garden, and the mobs that were around it. I mean, you had to see what an event can do. They had to close off bridges because there were so many cars coming into New York. They couldn't clear the streets around the Garden. Ali and Frazier were not allowed after the weigh-in that afternoon to go back to their hotels. They had to stay in the arena. Frazier went to sleep. Ali counted all the seats in the house. The cars, the limousines lined up from 33rd Street, where Madison Square Garden is, all the way up to 110th Street to disgorge their elite passengers. Frank Sinatra's taking pictures for Life magazine. Burt Lancaster's doing the closed circuitry. Diana Ross, all of them are in the audience, all the big stars. And you look up at the third balcony, and there's the former Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, obviously didn't get a better ticket. This was a place to be. And you really can't say that about a lot of events, no matter what they are, sports or otherwise.
Welcome back to the FDH Lounge.
It's interesting.
Field compression fractures in her L1 and L2 vertebrae.
Lateral epicondyle and lower disc.
Covered in a fine dust of particulate matter.
I ran the DNA. Brain tissue on the fragments means they're from a frontal bone.
It's composed of silica, sulfur compounds, and synthetic rubbers.
I've also noted a constellation of identical non-metric variants.
We make learning fun.
Phalanges, 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 dancing phalanges, dancing phalanges.
And now, your FDH dignitaries.
Episode 143, former Minnesota governor, pro wrestler, and wrestling and football announcer Jesse Ventura. Jesse, I got to tell you, as somebody who looks at this, and I'm a self-admitted political nerd, at first blush, you strike me as being a pretty good amount to the left of Ron Paul. Do you think you'd be that compatible with him?
Well, we differ on the abortion issue. Naturally, he's pro-life, I'm pro-choice, but that's just one thing. But on many issues, well, let's take why I dedicated this book to him. If you look at the dedication, and I did that because he was the only one that stood out on the congressional floor and made the statement that WikiLeaks hasn't killed anybody. How many people have died over the deceptive intelligence and lies we got fed on invading Iraq? And then he said even more profound. He said, in what's supposedly a free country, when telling the truth equals treason, we're in bad shape. When you go tell the truth and you got people hollering out that you're a traitor for telling the truth, well, where does this country stand then?
Well, Jesse, I'd be interested in knowing if any differences are limited to the social issues or perhaps go beyond, because, again, and this is just at first blush looking at things on the surface, do you really subscribe to his notion of what would be a radically downsized federal government in terms of spending programs and the like? Are you good with Ron Paul on that kind of stuff?
I'm pretty solidly with him on that.
Okay.
You know, the federal government, first of all, if you look at our forefathers, they told us to stay out of foreign affairs. I'll tell you this. I would cut the defense spending budget hugely because I would go out and close every base we have outside of the United States of America, and I would bring all our men and women home.
What about entitlements? I mean, Ron Paul would definitely like to go after those. Are you with him on that?
Well, the main thing to go after is corporate welfare. If you look at, I've seen charts, and if you compare corporate welfare to social welfare, corporate welfare is hundreds to 200 times bigger than social welfare.
Episode 142, film producer and director Tommy Reed. Watching the movie, the different things here with the Val Kilmer character and with the police, it almost, I'm not going to say that there was necessarily a bemusement, but a thing of like, hey, Danny boy, try not to kill any civilians while you guys are blowing each other up. I mean, you had the ATF in Cleveland in the summer of '76. It seemed like the feds were taking it seriously. Me as a neophyte, I don't know anything about law enforcement, but I'm sitting here going, how the hell do you have the same cast of characters successfully and unsuccessfully blowing one another up over a period of time? I mean, is there not probable cause to have gotten the net out and gotten a lot of these guys in off of the streets? And I understand that the local police are figuring, okay, maybe they're just killing each other, but what was the thought process on that with local law enforcement? The ATF was taking it seriously, and I'm not going to indict the local police by saying they weren't, but what can you tell us about the mindset and the mentality that somehow or another allowed this stuff to go on and allowed these bombings to play out as long as they did?
Well, I don't think that any of the government officials on the FBI or the police force ever allowed, bombings to happen. It was just, It was a way of major intimidation during that time period, where basically Cleveland was dubbed Bomb City, USA, because of the way bombs were used in Cleveland in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot, which you're going to see. I actually have exclusive photos of these bombs that were reconstructed and pictures of the actual crime scene in the documentary. And we talk about what the bombs mean, their language of, what it is to intimidate. And so a lot of these bombs, sometimes they didn't even understand how to detonate them correctly, where you had bombs that had some of them gone off, literally the whole block of Waterloo would have gone up when Danny Green's house got blown up. But they didn't know how to correctly detonate the bomb. So I think that a lot of them, you know, they were anxious to try to get Danny Green, but they never really knew how to get him murdered. And so when you have all these cops that are involved, they want to catch you and they want to put you away so the streets are safer for the communities and everyone can take a breathe of fresh air, you know. And now all of a sudden you have this way of intimidating, you know, jury members. You had, you know, people stop, you know, using, you know, the witness protection probe because they were so intimidating and they just didn't want to deal with it. So they just, you know, either fled the area or just was quiet after they had a bomb go off near them. They were scared. So it's a very intimidating way. But I think the police force did a great job, and the FBI did a great job of coming to its fruition and solving all these murders and indicting the right people. Granted, you had a lot. I mean, James Willis is one of the best attorneys in the history of law and one of the Cleveland's finest attorneys, and he got a lot of these guys acquitted for some of their trials. And he's one of the smartest men I've ever interviewed in my life. And it's just amazing to see and hear him talk, especially in the documentary. He's so eloquent that you could see how he got a lot of these guys off and acquitted because there were errors in some of the chain of title reports that the government had. And that when you have one little crack in a case, they're going to find it. They're going to figure out a way to get this around this to stop the case from going forward. And it's just truly remarkable of what happened during that time period in Cleveland, period, because it's just an unbelievable, but yet it did happen. It really is believable, but you think it could never happen.
Episode 142, Rat drummer and author Bobby Blotzer. After making the jokes about him in the OJ clubs and everything like that, coming face-to-face with him on a public course out there in SoCal, that was one of the better stories in the book, too.
Well, I'll tell you, man, it's just weird to hear you ask about OJ because I just finished that book, I Did It, by OJ. And, wow, you know, and I was just telling somebody else that story. The guys actually that I have a line of wine coming out, and I was telling these guys the story about when I was golfing with him. And, or not golfing with him, but using the OJ Club, which you remember in the book. But, you know, that was the oddest thing I think that I've ever experienced. Next to me standing on stage 10 feet from Mick Jagger when the Stones were playing and no one else was there, I was thinking, how is it possible that I am the only one up here? You know, and Mick is looking over like, who is that creepy guy over there? Because at the time I had a long black trench coat on, I had a beard. I'm just standing there with a beard. The only one that was up on stage other than me were people that were working and doing things. I lasted about 10 minutes and then they kicked me off. But when I ran into this OJ thing, it was right after the trial, and I just thought, out of all the people in the world, I'm standing next to this cat, you know. And it was weird, man. It makes me weird to even think about it and talk about it, especially after just reading that book.
Episode 136, analysis of FDH Lounge, worst president ever balloting to celebrate President's Day. Guys, you can each take it away here. I'll start with you, Tim. Thoughts on Jimmy Carter getting voted our FDH Lounge worst president of all time?
No-brainer. Oil situation, inflation, hostage crisis. I mean, the guy he just wasn't prepared to be president. I mean, actually reminds me a lot of the guy today that we have, just in over his head. And
looking at Iran, we're living with the ramifications even today. That's why he got my first place vote. Nate, some thoughts here before we wrap this.
Ditto to what you guys said. I mean, he was in way over his head, and that's why I point to Nixon. We're still living with ramifications of Carter 30 years later, and, you know, that should not be the case, that you're living with dire ramifications 30 years out from when a guy was in office.
Episode 135, seventh inning slouch analysis of the Albert Pujols contract situation. In terms of his persona and in terms of what's really going on behind the scenes, there's a disconnect that I find to be disingenuous. And I say that as somebody who's always respected the guy, and I see the way the game is being played right now.
And I think that's fair, and I think we actually might be saying the same thing. I'm saying, like, the contract demand itself, let's set that aside for a second. But the ultimate, I don't want to say ultimatum, but the deadline and all that kind of stuff, and the leaks and all that stuff, I don't have a problem with it. I just don't.
I hadn't heard about not waiving the no trade, but it does. You know, honestly, if I were the Cardinals,
that's what I was going to bring up. Yeah. That's what makes it evil. The whole point of I won't be traded this season. What if you're 10 games back in the middle of the season and now the Cardinals aren't going to get anything for you when they could trade you off to the Yankees or Red Sox or the Cubs and get some decent prospects or something? That's what makes him evil, this whole statement of you won't trade me no matter what. That's ridiculous.
Episode 143, legendary pro wrestler Bret Hitman Hart.
A thought popped into my head. With your father Stu's background as being such a legendary shooter, had MMA been in its the level that it is today, might we be talking about former UFC middleweight champion Bret Hart instead of 5-time WWE champion? Could that have been a possibility at the time?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think just the whole sort of gladiator kind of mentality that goes with MMA, as opposed to the sort of pretend sort of pro wrestling world. I'm always much happier and grateful that I was in a profession where we only pretended to hurt each other. It's really, pound in one of my buddy's brains and punch his face in and all that. I have a lot of respect for MMA, especially the submission wrestlers, and I love GSP, and I have a lot of my favorites in it, and I admire him. Even Brock Lesnar, I have a lot of respect for him, but I'm just glad that I never got weeded into that to make a living. Just doesn't appeal to me just on a ethical level.
Episode 131, sports travel expert Gary Herman. Another one of my favorite stories, again, the Winter Classic in Pittsburgh. How great is that? You guys are there. Thing gets bumped back from 1 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night due to the rain. Everything. Gotta go somewhere. Gotta go watch something. Hey, Youngstown State's playing down the road. I mean, that going to Youngstown State hoops game is just to borrow the word from that weekend, classic.
Well, we also had Cleveland State, but realistically, I looked at my BlackBerry and I was able to fill out the mileage and the logistics of it. The game started at 2 o'clock there, and it was a longer ride. So Youngstown State made all the sense in the world. Thanks to our friend Manny Morales and, like I said, Mike Err for looking out for us. We were staying in Washington, PA, and by the time we found out, it was too late to cancel the room, so I had to drive a little extra. But we do whatever it takes. That's what royalty's all about.
Episode 136, USA Today sports columnist Michael McCarthy. I remember a couple of years ago, Jim Calhoun got accosted by some grandstanding pinko at a press conference there. How do you feel about taking money out of the mouths of women and orphans? And once in a blue moon, they do get put on the defensive about it, Michael. It doesn't happen too much, though.
Put on defensive about it, and I've interviewed college coaches about it, and I've interviewed their agents about it, and they always give the same thing, the same answer. It's a free market.
Yeah.
We're getting paid what the free market says we should get paid. If the free market says we were getting paid $200,000 or $100,000, then that's what we'd be getting paid. But why should I be Mother Teresa here, where my colleagues, are making $5 or $6 million? Oh. So that's how they justify it, and and the schools justify these high salaries in a number of ways. First of all, college football is a driver of a lot of sports. I mean, the other people on campus might not like college football, but let's face facts. College football is footing the bill for a lot of these other sports that aren't making money. So a school might have 20, 25 sports programs that aren't making money through ticket sales and everything else, and college football is basically paying their way. So in a way, some of these sports on campuses should be very grateful to college football, because if they didn't have a strong college football program, there wouldn't be any money for them at all.
Episode 137, TMZ News Editor Mike Walters. I have a quote here from my producer, Steve Servillo. You were quoted as saying his brain is missing and presumed dead. Do you want to give any context to that?
Well, look, I mean, Charlie Sheen, it's weird when you go into the controlled chaos of his house. Let me tell you. I mean, at first you're thinking, this is crazy, that none of this makes sense, and how does somebody live like this? But I spent 4 hours with the guy, and at the very end of my conversation with him, to be honest, I felt like Charlie Sheen is 100% sane, 100% sober. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's talking about. This is not somebody who's gone off the deep end. This is not somebody who is on on drugs. I mean, yes, he is admitted to doing drugs, and I think that's part of the reason he acts like he acts now. But let me tell you something. This guy is sober, and he's articulate. He's focused. He knows exactly what he's saying, especially in these answers to an interview question. So it's really weird. I mean, the changing from walking into his house and thinking, wow, this is not what I'm used to, and then leaving after talking to him for that long, it's so night and day I can't even describe to you.
Episode 140, actor Dominic Chianese. I'd like to ask you, because I have a feeling your answer is going to be a little bit different. When we had on Ziggy cartoonist Tom Wilson on the show, we were talking about characters. He's fascinated by the Ziggy character and characters in general, and he spoke in such glowing terms of the Ziggy character that he actually inherited from his father and has done some things with here. I imagine for somebody like you, it's got to be a little bit more nuanced with the character that you embodied all that time. I'm sure you can see the good side and some of the things with Uncle Junior and some of the things that he did, but I imagine it's got to be a much more nuanced view to inhabit a character like that, correct?
You have to. Every actor, if he or she is considering himself an artist, must bring something of themselves into the role. You know, you use your own images, and a character like Uncle Junior, being from New Jersey, is not that far from a guy from the Bronx, as far as the speech patterns and things like that. So you do use your own experience, and I found a role that I could really identify with as far as that goes. I'm the right age. He was Italian descent, actually Neapolitan. You know, David made all the Sopranos Neapolitans. That's why they lived. That's why they came from Avellino, and that's important too. David himself is a Neapolitan. We use Neapolitan words, things that I could identify and bring some of myself into the situation of the character. But the actual development of the theory itself it's very, very much involved with the Stanislavski system of acting, which is not a formula for great acting, but it is a I hate to use the word method because the method is different for everybody, but there is an approach to acting that Stanislavski, the great Russian director back in 1920s, knew that actors must practice in order to bring something to the role that was very, very believable. And it's really the Stanislavski system. It's a system. It's an approach to acting. He died before he finished the whole program, but he also knew that talent can be originated in a person. Not originated. If you have the talent already, talent can be enforced and grow if you follow certain patterns of behavior, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of applying images from your own personal history. You see, but that's a talent. You have to have the talent, just like a piano player. But the piano player must rehearse before he can play Mozart and Beethoven. But you have to have the right technique, and that technique takes a lot of practice. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, this is amazing stuff, certainly, Dominic. Last question we got for you here, just to follow up on what you were talking about. I'm curious, again, for those of us that have never seen the process from the inside, to what extent, as you're speaking with David Chase or somebody else involved like this, any of the other writers, to what extent are you participating in the development of the character and possibly giving your input as to, gee, maybe, do you suppose he might do this in this situation? How does the evolution of a character go?
I would say it's a 50-50 proposition. Mm-hmm. What happens that they write the material and you interpret it. But when you bring something that you know is right for the character, they get very excited and they write even more for you because they realize you know the character. By that time, you know the character, and they listen to you and they hear you and they hear the voice. And I honestly can say that Uncle Junior was really a highlight because I could bring something of myself into it that made the character interesting, made him three-dimensional, made him real, and made him believable. So that's the job. You make it believable when you can bring something to the character that fits the circumstances of the play. It's really a play. Shakespeare said it. The play's a thing. So without the writers, you don't have it. You can be the greatest actor in the world. If you get lousy material, there's only a certain amount of impact you're going to have. But when you get great writing, like Shakespeare, there are many Shakespeare plays, and you bring your talent to that, then you got the audience in the palm of your hand, and they'll believe everything you say, and they'll react accordingly.
During any of the FDH Lounge commercial breaks, we recommend that you not wander too far. After all, you could miss something.
Survivors clawed through rubble, searching for any sign of the familiar.
They have no one that can guard them.
Ideal situation for Jimmy Clausen. It may not be the best place in terms of his pocketbook.
Yeah. And when you do that as a player, then your other teammates respect you.
Probably the only black man on a big dog in Kadoka, South Dakota.
Ooh, Tyler.
All right, now we talked about the inside of the chicken. Now let's talk about the crust. The only way to go, all right, when you're making fried chicken is a situation where you double dip it. All right, so in this container, we're going to add some buttermilk and some hot sauce. Give it a little stir.
We're back. Okay, and now back to the FDH Lounge.
Episode 133, Fox Business Network host Liz Claman. We've gotten really good feedback the previous times you've been on the show. I mean, our target audience, I think, basically more or less is younger to middle-aged males, and yet everybody seems to feel like they can relate really well to you, and I think it's because, again, you may define yourself as a feminist, but you're not dogmatic about it. We were joking about the last time you were on here about the thing with Geraldo and the pajamas. We were laughing about that a little bit. I like that the pieces that I've read about you, when you get asked about wardrobe stuff, you don't go into this whiny crap of don't objectify me. You answer the question straightforwardly. I think that's what people like and can relate to about this. It's just the way that you deal with stuff.
Yeah, I'm a guy's gal. I really am. I like to sit around and play football, and I can go toe-to-toe with anybody. And it takes a lot to offend me. It really does. And I think that people need to calm down, and they need to have humor. They need to act and understand that nobody's out, hopefully, to really offend anybody. Wardrobe, who cares? Let's show a little cleavage. This ain't radio for television. It's fine. It's fine. Who cares? I just love what I do, but I truly do feel, and I wish this is a little Pollyanna-ish, but I wish people were just judged on their abilities.
Episode 137, pro wrestler Jacques Rougeau. As far as the origins of how you turned heel, as you alluded to there, I had seen a quote, I think it was attributed to you on the internet, of where you mentioned that Vince seemed to think that fans were having a harder time getting behind two French-Canadian guys beating up on Americans. I have to say, looking at it through the prism of adolescence, so maybe this is a little fuzzy, but at the time, I don't remember that being the case. Seemed like you guys were fairly popular. I didn't seem to recall anything like that. But I don't remember there being any particular urgency to turn you guys.
There was just something. There was two things possible. The way I looked at it, it was because I felt like we weren't becoming number one stars as baby faces. But then on the other hand, we didn't have the pen behind us. The big boss wasn't writing the scripts for us to come in and become the world champions. And we were middle-class wrestlers, a great team to put on a card, to entertain the people. My brother and I never left anybody unsatisfied, but we never had that big push. And I think that's what made a difference. I've learned that now as being a promoter for 10 years myself. I have some talent sometimes that's a better talent, but not at the right place at the right time. Example, I remember when my brother quit in 1989, we'd been there for like 4 years together, and we were just in line for the titles, and there came in from nowhere Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. And it was like, because of a business deal with WCW, or not WCW, but where they'd come from, they just came right in front of us, and those 4 years of hard work, it was just like, how can I say that? Politics sometimes in wrestling make things happen that a lot of guys they can't take it anymore. Like they wait for the chance. And I know personally, to be honest with you, as heels, when they turned us heels, we had a lot better opportunity. Thinking of the great matches we had with the Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, and thinking that when we go to the Boston Gardens, there's not a hockey team that the NHL hates the most than Boston, than Montreal Canadiens. When we'd go to the Spectrum at Philadelphia Flyers, it was the same thing. Nassau Coliseum in Long Island, it was the same thing. The Montreal Canadiens are just French frogs. It's like, but don't ask me why. Don't know where it originates from, except from the fact that you Americans are so patriotic. I'd say that it was a natural thing, and for me to come in, what a great time I had, because for me, Americans are no better than Canadians at all, and not more Quebecers anyway. And it's always been, I always thought that from the bottom of my heart.
Episode 144, actor Curtis Armstrong. The number one thing I'm sure that gets thrown at you over time as far as the roles played over the years, of course, Booger from Revenge of the Nerds. I got to say, my number one thing, frankly, with you, I was the biggest moonlighting mark back in the day. I mean, there are not even words to tell you.
Really?
So, I mean, the role I always think of is Herb Viola from that show. That's always the number one thing. I've seen you in any number of things also, Curtis, but for me, that's got to be right up there. I mean, that was network when there was only the 3 networks before cable was much of an impact. Is that kind of on the next tier of things where people associate you?
Not as much as you'd think, actually, because it was a short run. There were only about 3.5 seasons of that show, and it was in the 80s, and they didn't release it on DVD until a few years ago. And by that time, I think a lot of people, unless they were like you and actually watched it at the time, a lot of people had pretty much forgotten that show. It seems to have sort of dropped through the cracks. So, in fact, although I do get it a lot, especially since they put them out on DVD. It's not really as commonly mentioned as you would think.
Episode 152, baseball legend Gaylord Perry. A piece of trivia that I couldn't quite believe when I found it out. Maybe it would be easier for you to believe because the next place you pitched after this was Texas, so you got a chance to see what that was like there. I understand they done the 10-cent beer night without any incident down in Texas there. Is it just a different breed of folks down there where you can ply them with 10-cent beer and not have a riot?
Well, they're used to drinking a lot more, so much hotter down there. And, I think today was about 107 about it down. So you got to have plenty of fluids, and there's a lot of Texas beer down there. So, 4 or 5 beers don't affect them like it does the people in Cleveland.
Episode 136, Entertainment Weekly columnist Dave Karger. It is such a consensus that, again, King's Speech a fairly heavy favorite, but if it ain't the King's Speech, it'll be the Social Network. Amazing that you can all but rule out 8 of the 10 nominees in the category.
Oh, absolutely. If there's a movie besides The King's Speech that's going to win, it's A Social Network and absolutely no other. I mean, The Fighter has the most outside of outside chances to win, and then the other 7, no way. So I can see why the bookies are having such a big spread, if I'm using the right terminology even, that you would make so much money if 127 Hours or Black Swan or Winter's Bone or Inception actually wins, because there's just no way that's going to happen.
Episode 130, BCS Executive Director Bill Hancock. You deal with media types all the time here, so I'll let you guess on this. I'm sure that you're going to get it right away. If I was to tell you I had one little wrinkle I'd like to see, what do you think it is?
Oh, you'd probably like to see one more game after the bowls are played.
+1, Bill. That's what I'm talking about. And I tell you what, now TCU, again, here's the thing. I thought you struck gold going into last night. Okay, I'm thinking 1 versus 2. This is undisputed. Yeah, TCU ran the table, beat Wisconsin, but I expect, these 2 teams tonight to really look like what they did during the regular season, and it'll be decisive. You'd kind of have a little harder time than I would have thought going into last night, putting Auburn way the heck ahead of TCU, the way that things shook out. Auburn and Oregon didn't necessarily look representative of the way they played during the regular season. Maybe that was the layoff or anything else like that. But to somebody like me that would say, gee, it would be a great thing. Maybe you have, your semifinal bowls on New Year's Day. You already have the infrastructure in place with the extra game, and it's more or less a week later, so you already have that. That would have been the stumbling block previously. You're not extending the season by doing that. I understand that's not something you're presently an advocate of, but just give me any of your thoughts on the subject, as you've been outlining them over time.
Yeah, I'm not an advocate of it. On the other hand, I'm absolutely willing to listen to what people think about it. Here's the issue. What if Oregon, Auburn, and TCU are still undefeated after the bowl games? Then who picks? Who decides which 2 move on? And have you really gained anything
from what we have right now. I'm not sure about that. No, the team number 3 is really going to be unhappy that they didn't get picked. And the other thing about it is a logistical thing, and I think it's really important, and it's that, say you're able to play all the bowl games on January 1, which is problematic, but say you're able to do it, and the championship game a week later, you're not giving much time for folks fans to buy their airline tickets, make hotel arrangements. And at some point, would fans say, you know what, I don't think I'll go to the bowl game. I think I'll wait to see if we get in the championship game. Coaches don't have much time to prepare. There's a lot of logistical things that really have to be thought through. And I think the other part of it is, for me, we call it bracket creep, CREEP, bracket creep. And what it is this would not stay at a four-team tournament. Eventually, Team 3 would be so unhappy that they would ask for change, and so this little +1 would turn into an 18 playoff, and then 12 and 16 maybe. And the reason I'm saying that is, if you think about it, every sports bracket has increased through the years. College basketball certainly has. College baseball, softball, the NFL, NBA, every sport, literally every sports bracket has increased. And I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought that if we went to a +1 that we could keep it at that size forever.
Episode 152, two-time Indianapolis 500 champion Dan Wheldon. In terms of the migration of drivers between different circuits, something that I'm curious about, with you having won your second 500 this year and the first one having been in 2005 when the open wheel circuit, actually there was 2 at the time. You had Champ Car going as well, and the field at that time versus what the field was now. What was your perspective on winning it a second time when obviously a couple of these guys have gone to NASCAR and not come back, but by and large, nobody can dispute the strength of the fields 2009, 2010, 2011. That wasn't always the case at every point during the time when there were the 2 domestic open wheel circuits here. Did you take any greater sense of accomplishment from the second championship, or was it roughly about the same?
No, I think, to be honest, it was very similar. What you've got to remember is whenever you're racing in the Indianapolis 500, you've got the best of the best teams, and those teams are not going to put people in those cars that are not talented. So when you consider that just as teammates alone, I had Tony Kanaan, Dario Franchitti, Brian Herder. And then, like you talked about, Sam Hornish. I mean, these are incredibly talented race car drivers. So I have to say, if you're racing up front, it doesn't matter what year they for me, they've all been very, very competitive. I would say the depth of the field this year was perhaps deeper than it's ever been. But in all honesty, the top 10 to 15 any year that I've raced in the 500, it's been incredibly tight, incredibly competitive, and it's one of those races where it doesn't matter what year you compete. If you don't execute that race perfectly, you're not going to win, and that's what makes the Indianapolis 500 so rewarding to everybody involved. There's so much preparation that goes into it. There's so much hard work, and you have to execute everything. Like, there's not one thing you can let slip come race day, because otherwise you're not going to win. And I love that challenge of it. But I just love driving that racetrack. It's a phenomenal racetrack. There's a great amount of history and tradition behind it. And, it's just, for me, it's great to be a part of.
Episode 133, best-selling Wall Street author William Cohen. When you were on previously, it was maybe, 8 months after the events of September 2008, and you said at the time, and this squared with everything that I had been reading, that we didn't even necessarily know the situation with all of the banks and the institutions involved, to the extent to which some things were still kind of muddy, to which the mortgage securitization maybe still had some of them in a bad position that wasn't yet known. I mean, it's about 1.5 years from that point on, we're hearing that this is going to be the worst year yet for mortgage defaults. Again, from my outside perspective, I mean, I just have a churning feeling in my gut. I know that corporate profits have been up a lot over the course of the last 2 years, but as quickly as it returned to business as usual, which we talked about during your past time on the show here, I just have this gnawing feeling that we still haven't necessarily gotten to the bottom of everything that went wrong in that instance, and that there could still be vestiges of that crisis that come back to bite us in the next year or two. Is there anything to that fear, do you think?
Well, I don't think, a lot of people would like, as we talked about before, would like to quickly have us return to the status quo and act as though as everything, is hunky-dory, that we're back from the brink, we're so much better off now than we were in September and October of 2008. And I'm not saying that isn't true to some extent, but I think there are some serious structural problems that still exist, not only in our economy, but frankly, in the European economies and the world economies. There's a serious sovereign crisis in Europe, whether it's in Ireland, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, and potentially Italy. I mean, there are real problems both with the banks, the financial institutions, and the sovereign countries themselves. And we know that there are problems in our own states in terms, as you were mentioning before, in terms of financial deficits that they cannot overcome. And look at what we've done, at the federal level. I mean, this wonderful tax cut deal that everybody is, jumping up and down and getting so excited about, that happened during the lame duck session, has increased the 2011 budget deficit to $1.5 trillion. That is a record budget deficit, and, there doesn't seem to be the political will. There's a lot of jawboning about it, but there doesn't seem to be the political will in Congress to do anything to close those deficits, and the hope is that we can just continue to finance our deficits with, the Chinese or the Japanese or the Koreans who are kind enough to buy our debt, or the Federal Reserve, which is kind enough to buy our debt. So I think and to say nothing of unemployment and the chronic levels of unemployment, I think there are huge problems. Now, you talked about whether any of the mortgage securities and people are still increasing number of people are losing their homes through foreclosure, and I think it's a crime that banks aren't willing to negotiate with individual homeowners a new a mortgage for their homes, reduced mortgage with reduced rates to get those payments back on track where it can be a performing loan. I mean, why they do it for GM and Chrysler but don't do it for individual homeowners, is beyond me. But I think that basically at the moment, what's going on at the bank level is that the banks took such big write-downs on the value of these securities that part of the reason they're showing great profits in the last few quarters is because they're reversing those losses, and as the value of these securities increases, they're taking some of those gains into their balance sheets, into their P&L. And I think that, it's accounting gimmickry. I think there is a fundamental, proper shift going on now towards less risk-taking on Wall Street than there had been and becoming more like utilities. I mean, once upon a time, Wall Street provided a very, very valuable service for corporate America, which was raising capital anywhere in the world whenever they wanted it, 24/7, providing capital to these companies so they could grow, they could build new plant and equipment, they could hire more workers, so they could do all the things that we would like them to do now but don't do. Really, it doesn't seem that they do anymore. Now, it seems that Wall Street, by and large, maybe some of this will be stopped to some extent, but had become a huge casino, as you were saying before. And that's not very productive. And again, it gets back to this bonus culture where the incentive was and remains on Wall Street to take big risks with other people's money. Anytime you put humans in a situation where they're being rewarded for taking big risks without any accountability, it doesn't take a genius to realize that that's exactly what they're going to do.
Episode 140, longtime sports executive Harvey Schiller. With some of the names that you mentioned, not least of which Ted Turner, it does raise the question, Dr. Schiller, for somebody like you who's worked for and with so many other prominent executives in your time in terms of working for, whether it be Ted Turner, George Steinbrenner, working with Billy Payne, who of course has moved on to the Augusta National since running the Olympic Committee, and working above a very famous executive in his own right, and Eric Bischoff. Are there any commonalities among these guys? I mean, they all seem to be very driven, very type A personalities. They're all very charismatic types. Are there any things about any of these guys, either individually or collectively, that jump out at you when I mention those names?
Well, I think that in general terms, they are uncommon individuals. I think that's a term that I would use, in that each one approached problems in a different kind of way. all of them, each and every one of them expected that things would be done in the best way. And, I mean, it didn't matter whether it was the food being served or what was being done on the broadcast or the music that was played or the talent that you had. So I think that expectation was the one generality that was shared by all of them. Each one had a different knowledge base. You know, Ted came out of the sign industry. He had built a superstation. George had come out of a family out of the shipping business, but at the same time had this love for athletics in a very different kind of way. Eric is a unique individual in that he was both a talent and a producer and a director, which, you know, operates at a very, very different level. When you put them all together and you throw in people like General LeMay, who commanded SAC that I had the opportunity to work under at a distance, and so forth, I think each one of them brings something different to the table. I think that was the beauty of getting to work with all of them. Each one, had, as we all do, me and everyone else had some failings that you worked around. The one thing that each one of them expected from me was, I have something that's of value. I want you to make it better. Don't hurt it. So whether it was the Yankees or the Nets or whether it was the Devils or whether it was the Southeastern Conference schools or whether it was all of the assets that Turner Broadcasting had, from being the president of the hockey team to working with the Braves and the Hawks, the expectation was that you're going to make it better, but you're never going to be in a position to do anything to harm that treasured element.
That's very, very interesting to hear about all the different perspectives there. I dare say, Dr. Schiller, not to tell you your business, but it seems to me there's a pretty good management book in that for you. You've been privileged to work with so many of these guys. I didn't even know that General LeMay was among them, but my goodness, you've got something there if you want to go for it.
Well, I've been asked several times. The problem is as you start to delve into it, what people are interested in, it becomes very personal, and you still had, although some have passed away, that you still have personal relationships, and you honor that because they respect that in you. So you have to be careful with that. The idea of doing it as a learning thing is important, but to do it just to make money is not worth it.
Episode 147, actor Matthew Modine. Let me let you characterize it. I saw the trailer. It was a very kind of whimsical one here. You're clearly trying to make some points, so why don't you try to set it up for us?
Well, it's a very difficult film to describe. Obviously, I've given it a very provocative title, Jesus Was a Commie. But I'm not religious. I think that Jesus was an extraordinary human being, and, don't think I'm being blasphemous or wanting to cause pain. I mean, that's just my opinion. But I do think he was an extraordinary teacher and a person. I could compare him to other people over the history of people who have changed the way we behave and altered our consciousness, pushed us a little bit to the left. And if you look at the things that Jesus is supposed to have said and the things that he's supposed to have done, by definition of what communism means, in the best sense, in the utopian sense, then by definition, I think that you could say that he was communist. Of course, communism didn't. The concept, the word, didn't exist when Jesus was walking the earth. But the film, in the bigger sense, addresses the tremendous challenges we face as human beings today. The environmental disasters that are happening all over the world, seemingly simultaneously right now, from Japan to the Midwest to our friends in the South here that are experiencing all this tremendous flooding. The Gulf, with the oil spills. I mean, we face tremendous environmental challenges right now. And what the film ultimately is saying is that these challenges are things that we have to address and face as human beings, that we can't look to a savior to save us from the problems that we face. It's up to us. It's up to each one of us as individuals to take steps. And as I say in the film, the final lines of the film is, if you do those kinds of things as well as Jesus did, you divide time. That this is a person who altered the consciousness of human beings on this planet, and there's a before him and an after him. The only other person I know who thought that he could divide time was Friedrich Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. He thought that there would be before Nietzsche and after Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, however you want to pronounce his name. But obviously he didn't succeed in doing it. It's a very provocative film, and I'm very, very proud of it.
Episode 150, comedian Gilbert Gottfried. Gilbert really lived up to the expectation. Thank you so much for being our keynote guest on our 150th episode tonight.
Oh, thank you. And go get rubber balls and liquor.
Absolutely. Go get the book, too.
Yeah.
On the FDH Lounge, our dignitaries always speak their minds, and so do our guests. Just listen to pro wrestling legend Jim Cornette, Liz Claman, and Bob Barker. Next time you're passing through town, the FDH Lounge, sir, is treating you to that so you can write a restaurant review of Goodman's.
If I come to Cleveland, I get corned beef. I'll be there with bells on.
I had, as I said, a wonderful time at CNBC, but I knew it was time for me to leave because, I'd landed Buffett, I'd landed Bill Gates. I felt like I'd done everything I could do, and every time I'd pitch a small business story, they'd say, you can't trade it. You can't trade on it. It's not publicly traded. And I kind of thought that was a little myopic, and I was thinking, maybe I'll go to Animal Planet or something, I thought, hey, heck, I'll go to Al Jazeera. I'll be the first Jew on Al Jazeera. That's what I was ready for.
Well, I tell you, you're a very discerning fellow.
The FDH Lounge, the great American radio show on Internet TV, where nothing is off topic.